Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining Standards Australia here at Bridge Street or via our live stream for this exciting discussion about the scalability of quantum technology and the role that standards can play in building a strong quantum ecosystem, both in Australia and abroad. My name is Stephanie Groves, and I'm part of our Strategic Initiatives team here at Standards Australia. I'm also the National Project Manager for our working group on quantum computing. Before we begin, I'd like to take the time to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Today marks the launch of a series of white papers that provide key insights into the world of quantum technology and discuss the active role that standards can play in supporting the quantum community. In the hour we have together, we'll look into two topics covered in the first of the two reports, quantum computing and quantum communication systems, and hear from leading Australian experts about the intersection with standardization. We'll have some time at the end for a Q&A. So for those of you online, you can submit your questions anytime throughout the discussion using the QR code you see on the screen. And for those of you in the audience in person, please hold on to your questions until the end. Before I introduce our panelists, I would like to thank a few key people and organisations without who we would not be able to have this launch today. Firstly, the authors of the paper and two of our panelists, Associate Professor Nathan Langford and Associate Professor Simon Devitt. I would also like to thank our research and events team here at Standards Australia, notably Shannon, Romaine and Mary Beth. And lastly, for the support received from the Department of Industry, Science and Resources in making this possible. So, the first panelist that I would like to introduce is one of the co-authors of the white paper series and is sitting on my far left, Associate Professor Nathan Langford. Nathan is a former ARC Future Fellow, Associate Professor in Physics at the University of Technology, Sydney, and leads the Circuit Quantum Science Research Group, which works on experimental circuit QED quantum computing. He is a member of the UTS Centre for Quantum Software and Information, and is also the director of a new advanced prototype packaging facility being set up at UTS and USydney. Since the beginning of last year, Nathan has been heavily involved in the Australian Quantum Working Group and International JTC1 Working Group 14 on quantum information technology. Thanks for being here, Nathan. Our next panelist is Adam Stingemore. Adam is the General Manager of Engagement and Communications here at Standards Australia and is responsible for leading Standards Australia's engagement and strategic delivery, international, communications and design, research and analysis, and events team. Since joining the organisation in 2009, Adam has had various roles in engagement and standards development. He has been a member of the executive team since 2015 and represents Standards Australia on numerous national and international committees. Our next panellist and co-author of the white paper series is Associate Professor Simon Devitt. Simon is the Research Director at the Centre for Quantum Software and Information at UTS. His research focuses on quantum error correction and fault tolerances, the design of large-scale quantum computing and communication systems, and the compilation and resource optimization of quantum algorithms. Simon is the co-founder and managing director of HBAR Quantum Consultants and co-founder of a new quantum startup, Eigen Systems. Having spent over a decade working overseas in the quantum computing programs of the UK and Japan, Simon has worked with numerous corporations, startups, and VC firms on their expansion into the quantum technology space, and advised multiple government agencies on multi-million-dollar R&D initiatives. And last, but certainly not least, is our final panelist, Dr. Andre Saraiva. Andre is the head of solid-state theory at Diraq. Diraq is an Australian quantum hardware company focusing on the fabrication of large-scale quantum computers using traditional semiconductor COMS fabrication technologies. Welcome to you all, and thank you for being here today. So, my first question to kick us off is going to help set the scene for today's discussion. Simon, For those of us that aren't quantum experts, can you tell us what exactly is quantum technology?
Okay, so we're going to boil it down in a minute.
Okay.
Are we? So the way I always try and introduce this is you all know what quantum technology is. It's all in your own pockets. It's in every device that we see surrounding us at the moment, filming this, transmitting this. We've had a long history of quantum technology development, and it started at the beginning or towards the middle half of last century. The three quintessential quantum technologies that you're all familiar with is the transistor, is the laser, and medical imaging, MRI. Those three key technologies that arguably defined the 20th century are all functional because of the laws of quantum mechanics. We build these devices because we understand the laws of quantum mechanics. The transistors act as a switch. The laser has numerous applications, but I suppose maybe the most impactful is its application in regards to optic fiber and the global telecommunication systems. And MRI is about using magnetic fields to manipulate individual atoms in your body to create medical images. So we're just moving into what we call the second generation of quantum technology. The distinction between what happened last century and what we're trying to do today is we're now trying to figure out how to manipulate the quantum mechanical behavior of individual atoms or individual particles of light. And this opens up a plethora of new applications when it comes to computing, communication, sensing, that isn't possible in sort of what we call the classical world, which is what we've built using transistors and optic fibers. So this technology is hard. We've spent many, many years on it. Australia's been at the forefront of developing some of the core technology for quantum computing, quantum communication systems, and quantum sensing. But this is sort of a natural evolution of where we've gone from the technology that defined the 20th century. And the most exciting thing from my point of view is that I don't think I'd get much argument if I said that first generation quantum technology really did define the digital revolution of the 20th century and the relevant social, economic, and technological expansions we saw during that. So if the first generation of quantum technology did that last century, what's the second generation going to do for us in this century?
And so I'm curious to know, talking about this second generation, is there an application that you're particularly looking forward to, something in the near term that you might want to talk about, Simon?
I'm not sure there's something that I'm looking forward to. I mean, it's just so hard for us to really pin any of this down. I mean, it'd be asking somebody in, the 1940s who's investigating, digital computing for the first time, what's your favorite application? It's YouTube or it's Uber Eats. It's not something that I'm really feeling comfortable to sort of enunciate as to what I think the best application for quantum technology is going to be in the next 50 years. But we're now looking at utilizing quantum resources and utilizing the behavior of quantum mechanical particles to really drive a sort of new revolution in what computation and communications is going to look like. I don't think anyone on this panel is going to be even close when it comes to any prediction of what the next application is going to be in 10, 20, 30 years' time.
Mm-hmm. Nathan, did you have anything to add?
Sure. I guess Simon's already spoken about the first generation versus second generation quantum technologies. And for me, the defining difference there is the laser and the transistors and the MRI. For these machines, at the end of the day, though they work because of quantum mechanics, you don't need quantum mechanics to actually describe their behavior. And the fundamental difference with the second generation quantum technologies is that you cannot even describe the behavior of second generation quantum technologies without keeping this full information about quantum mechanics and how it works. And this highlights for me what I think is going to be one of the most exciting applications for quantum computing, for example, is that one thing that classical computers find really hard to do is to model the behavior of quantum mechanical systems. This is called, simulating a quantum system. And one of the visionaries of the quantum era, Richard Feynman, had the idea in the early 80s that what he said was the best thing you can do if you want to simulate a quantum system is to use another quantum system to do it. So this is likely, a lot of people are working on it. This is, I think, going to be one of the most exciting first applications of quantum computers, is going to be using quantum computers to simulate really complicated quantum mechanical systems that classical computers can't do. And just to give one example of why that might be interesting, it turns out that the Haber process that is at the heart of nitrogen fixation for creating fertilizer is actually driven by a quantum mechanical chemical reaction that we can't really model and understand very well on classical computers. And that's one of the things that, for example, we hope that a quantum computer of not too massive size will be able to actually start looking at how that process works. If you can take fertilizer production and make it even a few % more efficient, that could have a massive impact on carbon usage, sustainability, on energy consumption, on economies. It could have a big impact going forwards.
That's a really interesting point, and I'm keen to hear, Andre, your perspective from industry. What's going to need to happen before we see this technology out in the real world in helping with carbon capture or that type of thing?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the issue so they pretty much described what we need to do, but the issue is, it turns out that these quantum properties that you're trying to leverage in order to actually solve new problems that could not be solved so far, they are very flimsy. It's very easy to introduce errors in your computer, and it just breaks spontaneously. So you need to have some strategy to either mitigate that or correct that altogether. And that's when you start realizing that actually this is a daunting problem. A real useful quantum computer would be a very, very large machine with, if not in size, at least in number of actual quantum particles that you're controlling. So we as a society, as mankind at the moment, can typically get from tens to hundreds of qubits, for instance, in the case of quantum computers. Quantum technology is more than just quantum computers. I'm speaking from the point of view of quantum computers. Tens to hundreds of qubits at the moment, and making one error every 1,000 operations or so. This is so far from what you need. You need millions of qubits. One error every 1,000 operations, you can work with that, but it's pretty challenging. You can ask Simon.
So I think that's a good segue into the next topic. And so I know that there was significant government investment into quantum research in Australia in the 90s and early 2000s, which has really positioned Australia at the forefront of quantum capability in some regards. Nathan, can you talk a little bit about some of the advantages that Australia has in the quantum space and maybe how we can maintain our competitiveness?
So look, Australia has some big advantages. We were absolutely pioneering in the area of optical quantum computing. The folks at UNSW have done, they are literally leading the world in semiconductor quantum computing technologies. And so it's there are extremely exciting opportunities for building quantum computers. But I think where we have our biggest advantage in Australia is in the people. The fact that we have had such a long history of investment, 25 years or so of really high quality investment in quantum computing, specifically quantum computing technology, and longer if you can count the sort of quantum optics community that led into it. This actually means that in Australia we have a really fantastic training ground opportunity to bring more people. One of the things we're seeing over the world at the moment is that there is, a real dearth of quantum expertise, and there's so many new companies trying to start up, and everybody's trying to get people, and people are just desperately trying to find people with the right expertise to do this stuff. And we have a fantastic opportunity in Australia to do that. Sydney Quantum Academy is a great example of what we can do here with all the people in Sydney who have this expertise. what we can do to really help train the next generation. And we've seen it already. If you look around at many of the world's leading startups are already being led or were created by people who got their quantum education in Australia and across the board. So I think that's really where our biggest advantage is.
Simon, Andre, was there anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, I mean, in terms of our competitiveness globally, I mean, as Nathan said, we've had a long history of this. The government support has been extremely good over that time. And we are in the throes at the moment of developing a national quantum strategy, at least federally. The state governments in New South Wales and Victoria have already put in some significant investment just in the last 6 to 12 months. But the national strategy is our priority now. You look around the world, the British have just announced another $2.5 billion into their national quantum strategy. I think that's their second or third iteration of their national strategy. The French just put out a major white paper, I think 2 or 3 days ago. The Germans have expanded significantly, and then there's China and Japan, the US and Canada as well. So at the moment, our core focus, at least in terms of how to continue developing sort of the core technology and the workforce that Nathan has described in Australia, is to really try and push forward and actually get a national coordinated strategy on quantum to make sure that we are part of what's going to turn out in the next 30 or 40 years in the development of this technology and not just end up as customers.
Anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely put number one, the people, absolutely. And SQA has been doing an amazing job at keeping the people together and targeted and really creating a flow of talent that we need, as a company, we need that. I would say the other thing, in terms of the government support, you have to think of how far we are and how much further we have to go to actually get to something that is commercially valuable. Once it's commercially valuable, it pays itself, right? Of course. But to get there, there's going to be significant investment from private money, in particular, venture capital firms or big corporations that can see in the 10-year horizon, right? But there's definitely a big role that is going to be played by the government. And government here can be, a number of different instruments, right? So for instance, ARC has been great in fostering this basic science that led us to the point that we are. Australia is punching way above its weight. You have to use this term, right? If you're punching way above its weight. But fact is that now we are entering a new scale of investment. And the world is aware and is doing their part, and Australia cannot be left behind. Fact is that we are at the moment in a government that is really pushing actual money flowing into this field. But we have to be very aggressive if we want to stay. Because once the scale changes, all those years that you had in advantage can very quickly be lost. We already lost quite a few big Australian mines because of money, right? Like photonic quantum computing, for instance, is built by Australians, and it's operating in Canada and US at the moment, right?
Okay. Thanks for that, Andre. Pivoting now, Adam, I'd like to hear a bit about Standards Australia's role in this work. Can you tell us some of the work that's underway and how is Standards Australia contributing?
No, thanks, Steph. And it kind of ties together a lot of what we've been talking about in terms of Australia's leadership on this agenda, in terms of some of the greatest minds around quantum computing being born and bred here, or over the last decades choosing to be based here, right? Because this is where the action's been. And then taking a few steps back and saying, right, well, everything that's new is old again, and everything that's old is new again. How can we learn from the mistakes of the past? And if you look at the internet as an example, where it was left to run free, there were some simple things that might have been done to standardise terminology and definitions, right? It might be boring as hell to people who want to talk about how quantum computing might help us all live for 17 generations, but just having a common set of terms and definitions and a common language across the globe is really, really important. So with our expert community, we are contributing to the first international standard being developed through the multilateral system. I won't bore you on the details and acronyms, but to get that set of common language. So that's the first point, Steph. Sorry, it's a long answer. The second point is we don't want to be duplicating effort. There are not enough quantum minds in the world to be able to do the work that needs to be done. So we want to make sure that our experts are connected into the right forums globally to make sure that our influence remains strong. And then the third point, just to close off, we've spoken a little bit this morning about skills and about education. But here at Standards Australia, we talk about standards when we talk about skills, and making sure that at a pre-competitive level, we can have a knowledge transfer base globally to help us get on with the big job at hand.
Now, Nathan, as someone who's been involved in the JTC1 Quantum Technologies Working Group, I'm going to ask you, what type of areas of quantum technology are going to benefit from standardization, and how do we ensure that we're not standardizing too early?
So yeah, that's a real challenge. Quantum technologies do present some interesting opportunities. For example, if you think about quantum communications, one of the things that you can do in quantum technology with quantum technologies is to use quantum physical laws to actually define the security of certain communications. So there's a place where you don't necessarily need to wait for an industry consensus to come along to be able to define some standards, because you've actually got some underlying unambiguous principles which say this is secure or it's not secure. So you could start writing those standards already. I think more in the quantum computing space, I think you need to choose, there are two areas where we need standardization and we need it soon, and where we can do it soon. And the first thing is to look at areas where we are not treading on the economic competitivity of the companies that are trying to build quantum computers. So all of these companies have some economic value proposition that they offer. This is how we plan to make our money. But they also have a lot of supporting technology that they need to use. And a great example is the quantum assembly language, the open chasm as it's called, that was created by IBM. This is a technology that everybody is now using, this particular standard terminology for how to write quantum programs. Everybody is using it, but it wasn't, IBM could afford to put that out in the open and to try to get this developed, and it's got a lot of uptake because it's not really treading on the toes of anyone's economic value proposition. So that's the first place where you can be really effective, by identifying where are the supporting opportunities that you can focus on, which are not going to kind of harm the businesses that are trying to create it. The second opportunity is to go exactly in the opposite direction, which is that when we're trying to build quantum computers, when you want to know whether you need to invest in quantum computers, when you want to know whether you can trust quantum computers to work properly, if you're a government who's trying to decide, should we be funding this research, what's really important is to have unambiguous, rigorous benchmarks that have been broadly agreed across the community, and expert-driven benchmarks for how well your quantum computers are operating and whether they're doing what they say they are doing on the tin. And here is definitely something that impinges on companies' economic value proposition, because at the moment companies can often just, we're going to report whatever benchmarks are best for our particular these I like these numbers, they sound good, we'll use them to demonstrate our product. And of course, that's perfectly natural. But if you define if you get in and define the standards in the right way, and it's not an easy problem. This is still like cutting edge research in some respects. But if you can define that sort of rigorous benchmark that really applies across the board, then companies kind of have to get on board and say, right, well, everybody else's report, we have to report this, which allows you to start to make better comparisons. And that also gives on the other hand, it gives companies something to aim at, because it's like, right, we know that what we need to do is we need to make sure that our quantum computer can do these benchmarks to this level, and then we've got a product. So it has its advantages as well, but those two opportunities, like either steering clear of the economics or you've got to wade right in, and those have to be driven by clear public interest and clear investor government interest in that second category.
So Adam, I'm going to pivot a question back to you. We've spoke a bit today about how this technology is, changing quite rapidly, and standardization can be perceived as being a bit of a slow process. How can organisations such as Standards Australia ensure that we're keeping pace with the world of quantum technology?
Great question, Steph. Three sort of principles I think will help us there. So the first principle is to actually get on with it. I think there's been enough talk about what we might need to do in standards development globally, and we need to get on with it. The second point is to do so smartly and strategically. So really building on Nathan's point that there's no simple answer or no sort of crash through to this. We need to be really strategic in the work that we do. And then the last point is sort of a catch-all of being inclusive of all of the interests globally who need to be a part of this value and supply chain, and not to duplicate effort. So standards bodies have this nasty habit, including us, of duplicating effort and of trying to do the same thing in 8 countries at the same time, and that's got to stop. So the main focus for us is to make sure that we're pushing this work through the international system and looking at different ways to harness the energies of the experts here in Australia. So believe it or not, people with deep technical understanding of quantum technology are in demand. Do they want to be sitting around standards tables for weeks on end arguing about things that they don't have time to do? No. So we as the standard body, we need to step up and make sure that we're harnessing that contribution in a way that makes most sense, with outcomes in mind, not process in mind. And Steph, just to close that off, we're really excited by the energy around this program in Australia and internationally. So to go back to where I started, we need to get on with it.
I think that's a good message. So Simon, staying within the context of standards, I understand there's been some growing disconnect by some of the claims about the capabilities of quantum technology and maybe what is realistically possible at this point in time. I'm curious to know what you think is the responsibility of the quantum community in addressing these discrepancies, and how can standards help academia, industry, and policymakers ensure they're all on the same page?
Well, that's a difficult thing to achieve. As we know, when it comes to any kind of new technology, especially when it moves into the private equity space and the corporate space, you always have to deal with the hype cycle in one way or another. Now, the quantum industry, we've had our ups and downs over the last 10 or 15 years, even within sort of the more academic or research-focused nature of what quantum computing is, getting everyone on the same page. But as the technology is evolving, I think we're getting a little bit better at it. I think the community is much stronger than it was 5 years ago in regards to being able to set the tone and being able to set expectations as to what this technology is. Now, that being said, once you move into the commercial space, there's always nefarious players. Now, as Nathan sort of alluded to, one of the roles of standardization, I think, does come into play when you start thinking about, most importantly, verification and certification. Being able to define terminology in the right way to say, well, you can't just build a startup and splash your website with quantum in every second sentence and suddenly have a quantum technology company. We've actually been seeing this a lot in the quantum communication space, where companies who are just not doing quantum in any way, shape or form are marketing themselves as quantum companies. So certainly being able to define terminology and be able to set those kind of standards is very important. Where we're starting to see a little bit of this sort of in action is it's sometimes billed as a quantum technology, but it's not. It's a reaction to quantum technology, is this thing in quantum communications called post-quantum crypto. So post-quantum crypto is a response to the threat that quantum computers could pose to public key crypto systems, which form the basis of basically everything we do on the classical internet. So in that space, certification, verification, and standardization is becoming extremely important because this is a cryptographic primitive. This is something that is supposed to secure global communication systems. So it has to be on the level. You can't have companies, you can't have organizations that are coming out saying, well, why don't you strip out the RSA algorithm that lies on your online shopping thing and put in this thing without some kind of guarantee that it actually does what it says it's going to do. So post-quantum crypto, the standardization is being driven by the United States at the moment. The National Institute of Standards and Technology in the US is certifying several new cryptographic protocols that are supposed to be quantum secure. But I think we sort of take a lesson from their book, is to say, okay, it's not just necessarily standardization, it is certification. It's being able to say from a consumer level or from an investor level, these people are on the level with what they're saying, these people are on the level with what they're doing, and then sort of following that through. Quantum is a hard thing to get your head around. It's hard to be able to discern whether somebody's doing something on the level or whether or not they're just putting quantum on their website. And certainly standardization along with certification bodies and verification bodies have a huge role to play starting today.
Andre, I'm curious to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah. A lot has been discussed here that really is quite important. So a few things. I mentioned earlier, the government is going to have to step in and make this field survive until it's commercially viable. When I say government, it's actually the taxpayer, right? And the taxpayer doesn't have the means to verify that when I'm claiming a qubit, I actually have a qubit. So we need experts that are independent, unbiased, to tell me, okay, this is the point where you start being able to claim a qubit. And as soon as you start having governmental tenders built to make this field survive, that are given away to companies that actually don't have what they claim to have, this hurts me, who's trying to actually make a qubit, So this is quite important. So your question earlier about, is it too early to start standardizing? It's too late, actually, because the standards are already out and already being won by companies that don't really have what they claim they have. So this plays with what Simon was just saying just now. It's very easy to convince decision makers that what you're doing is quantum if they're not quantum experts, right? It's very easy. We're still early enough in this field, and it's going. Of course, once you have a quantum computer that actually outperforms anything else, then it's a no-brainer, right? You don't even care what's in there, right? But up until that point, having validation, verification, third parties that can confirm that what I'm saying is true is going to be key for my survival, right? So I want to play with them. I want to, as much as possible, be transparent to them, because people who are signing checks for us now, they're signing on the basis that for the next 10 years, I'm actually going to be doing the thing I told them that I was going to be doing, right? And it's hard to verify. Right?
I have
Steph,
one.
Maybe I can just jump in and say, when we're talking about unbiased verification, maybe I can make a plug for, this is where we don't just need strong investment in quantum industry at the moment. We also need strong investment in quantum academia. We actually need to support a substantial growth in academics who play a really vital independent role, who can actually contribute to standardization from a more unbiased perspective, who are not, at the end of the day, profiting from selling some product. And that's going to be really crucial as well. That has to grow also to just train the people that the companies need.
I have one final question for everyone on the panel before we open up to the audience Q&A. So can you give us a quick idea of what lessons can be learned from the development of other emerging technologies, such as AI, that may be applicable to the growth and standardization of quantum technology? Someone want to jump in first?
Sure, okay. Look, I think for me, the big lesson to learn from AI is that this is an area where the technology has simply far outstripped the public understanding. It has far outstripped the regulatory control. It has far outstripped even the kind of ethical frameworks that are being used by the companies who are trying to implement these things. I mean, we saw high-profile people being fired from Google because they were coming out and making public statements about the ethical frameworks of AI. And this is where I think really, and quantum is quantum. I describe quantum as a deep tech industry. So it's basically something that combines cutting edge science with absolutely state-of-the-art engineering. So it's not just a research field. You can't just have it done in academia because the engineering is hard, as Andre has said. It's a hard problem. But you can't just get engineers going away and doing it because there's a lot about the science that we still don't know. And this is a real, Arthur C. Clarke said that anything that is sufficiently technologically advanced is indistinguishable from magic. And we are really operating in that role where this is a technology that it's really hard to tell whether and we need to engage the public early. We need to be building the general literacy about quantum technologies and for investors, for government, everybody, so that people are more comfortable with this. By the time we have a working quantum computer, we need society to understand that there's not going to be a black hole created when they switch on the device, like people were still saying about the Large Hadron Collider, right? We need that understanding to be far advanced so that people can be comfortable with this new technology when it arrives.
Adam, do you have anything to add at this stage?
I couldn't agree with Nathan more. And just reflecting on Nathan's comments, I think, it's current right now to think about AI and to think about all the lessons that we're learning now from AI and watching standardization catch up and policy making catch up and the public conversation catch up. But equally, the challenge that we all have when we travel internationally with power plugs not working and the train gauge issue and the VHS and beta issue, for those of you old enough to remember that, these are lessons that we have learnt many, many times before, number one. Number two, we have the opportunity to try and stop that or mitigate that. And number three, the potential of quantum computing, as I understand it, is much more than a VHS video. So it's really, really important that we learn those lessons and take different steps, Steph, than the ones we've taken before.
Thanks, Adam. Simon?
Yeah, I mean, what Nathan said and what Adam said is definitely stuff to consider. My outlook on this is that we're still a very, very long way away from where we need to start considering these options. And mainly, we're spending so much time as the research community and industry to a certain extent trying to figure out the utility of quantum computing for stuff we want to do. The sort of nefarious actors and ethical considerations, maybe if we can figure out something that we want to do with a quantum computer that's going to happen in the next 10 or 15 years, questions about whether that could be turned into some nefarious action could be considered. But we're still, quantum computing has come out of the gate very, very early in regards to leaving the academic space and going into the commercial space. A lot of it's still solidifying. Take quantum computing, for example. We've got 9 major systems that we're looking to build a quantum computer out of. This is not PowerPC versus Intel. This is quantum computers built from light versus quantum computers that are built from silicon. I mean, it's just a disconnect now that the next 10 years we're going to sort of see this drill down and focus more down depending on what kind of technology is actually going to be realizable. And the one thing I will agree with Nathan on is that it's about literacy. We've had 150 years of pretending as though you have to be Einstein to even grasp quantum mechanics. That's just not true. You know, you can walk into a classroom of 13, 14-year-olds and start talking about quantum algorithms and quantum communications. They're perfectly fine with it. What ends up happening is they get to the age of 21 or 22 and it's been distilled in them through popular culture that you have to be an Einstein or a Feynman. And even then you don't really get it. That's going to change over the next 10 or 20 years. And when that changes, you'll have 13-year-olds talking about entanglement the way they talk about Python today. And then you'll start seeing, I think, a lot more development and a lot more solidification, both of the technology and the public's reaction to the technology.
Andre, any final thoughts?
Yeah. I guess one thing that AI taught us is actually we had learned in a much more painful way just before with coronavirus is the power of exponentials, right? Once you hit a certain point, it just zooms past you, right? We're preparing for a quantum future, but at some point, all of a sudden, the society overnight changes because it actually starts working, right? The same happened with AI, and now there's this sudden realization that, oh, wait a minute, we should have been preparing for the societal impacts of this technology, right? What is going to happen to the jobs of all the graphics designers, and what's going to happen once governments start making decisions based on AI, and are these decisions verifiable in any sense? So these questions also exist in quantum, and we cannot wait until quantum is ready to start having a society that is capable of taking in this sudden exponential change in value of money and value of jobs and livelihoods and so on. So I think one thing that I would say it's probably where we haven't really put that much thought yet is forget quantum. I don't need to know quantum mechanics. What does technology does to societies, to imbalances of power, imbalances between countries, and so on?
So I see a couple of questions coming in through the live stream, and the first one is one that we've touched on already briefly, but maybe we could expand more into the type of partnerships or collaborations between industry, academia, and government that are necessary to drive quantum technologies. Does anyone want to take that one?
Yeah, I suppose I've already said that quantum is deep tech. It needs cutting edge science, state of the art engineering. Many of the biggest companies working in quantum today really recognize that they absolutely need to still be working with the academic community and supporting the academic community and benefiting from it as well. That sort of industry academic collaboration is super critical still. And they just took the question off. It was, oh yes, and the other thing I just driving on again, like the quantum industry is exploding. The number of people who are experts in quantum is not exploding at the same rate. And we need to make it happen. And that's not going to happen from more companies being created. We need to create more sort of a bigger academic community. And even that won't work because as Simon and Andre touched on, by the time people get to university, they've already been told that quantum is too hard to do. So we need to go to primary schools and to gradually be teaching those kids so that in 15 years' time, the kids who are choosing what to do at university know that quantum is an exciting thing to do and they can do it. It's not only for geniuses, it's not only for middle-aged white men, it's for, everybody in the community from across the spectrum. And I think that's really important. There are some exciting things happening. This Einstein First project and now Quantum Girls from coming out of Western Australia, which is trying to start doing that. But like as Simon said, you can talk to young kids. In my undergrad, I gave a demonstration, a science demo, to a group of kids that were about 5 to 7 years old. They were a young Montessori primary school class. And we took them up to lasers and how they worked and atomic theory of atoms being, quantized and how that allowed you to create lasers. And they were 6 years old and they can get it. You just have to find different ways of talking to them. And that's really important.
Any other thoughts from the panel? No?
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Steph, at a different level, the more that we can work together pre-competitively to make sure that we've got a playing field in ways that are valuable, to Nathan's point, right? There's no point working together to do the same thing over again, and that we can demonstrate impact to the long-term vision, the better off we'll be, and not just pick a couple of winners. Sorry.
No. We're seeing more questions coming in. I'm happy to move forward.
Sure. Might go with this latest question for you, Simon. You mentioned that NIST is leading the work in the US in the areas of standard development. Are there other countries leading in this area?
For standardization, I'm actually going to defer to Nathan because he has been doing a lot more reviewing the standardization efforts around the world than I have.
Yeah, so for post-quantum cryptography, there are really two, it's being driven by two regional standards bodies. One is NIST out of the US, and the other one that people have been working has been in the ETSI, which is the European Telecommunications Standards Institute, something like that. Anyway, they've been working on it for quite a number of years. And just to point out, I think Adam's talked about how we really need to make sure that we use people's expertise wisely, and that's absolutely true because we're so short of quantum experts, and quantum experts need to be involved. And so we need these processes to be coming through the international system, but at the same time, we can't wait for the international system to catch up. So I think we need to be more creative about how we approach standardization. And the work that bodies like ETSI and NIST are doing on post-quantum crypto, I think, are a great example of how we can get fast, more agile standards processes happening at a regional level, which can then be hopefully adopted into the international level in a more streamlined way. And I think we need things to end up at the international level, but we need to find faster ways to get there.
And Steph, if I could just sort of reinforce that last point. So one of the things that we're looking at the moment here at Standards Australia is how we can practically do that. And there's a lot of work being done at the moment to find the practical rules of racing that you would use to implement that so that the work could be done quickly in one environment and then push through the international system quickly to benefit all.
Thanks, Adam. We might turn to some audience questions. So we have Mike with a microphone. And he's going to just raise your hand if you have a question.
Hi, I'm Sharon Vegas. I'm the research manager at Better by Standards. Really interesting topic. Whenever you have new technology, you have new opportunities, but also new risks. You have things like known unknowns. What would you think would be the key ethical concerns of quantum technology? And I'm thinking things like gene editing or the use of quantum in defense and also data privacy.
It's a great question. Anyone want to jump onto that one? Andre?
I have an answer. I have an answer. Probably not going to be satisfactory. Yeah, so there is a ton. Every time there is a technology with this level of impact, there will be ethical concerns, either on the way that it ends up used, as mentioned before, it furthers imbalances in power and imbalances in economic capabilities. Defense applications, of course, whatever geopolitical group gets through a quantum computer first is going to have a huge defense advantage, and you probably want to mitigate that as much as possible and keep a global balance. And then in terms of the actual applications, gene editing, to be honest, in general, we don't do much biology on a computer nowadays because biological processes tend to have, as Nathan was mentioning, really difficult chemistry to describe. Quantum computers are really good at that. So you're going to see a boom in biotech driven by modeling that we're just unaware. It's things that don't exist. It's not that they exist and they're going to be done better. People don't do those things because it's impossible with current computers. So to be honest, it's, as I mentioned before, it's the power of exponentials. It's going to zoom past us, and we have, as a society, to be ready to wake up to a world that is very different one day because of quantum computers.
Nathan, Simon, anything else to add?
I mean, what Andre said is true to an extent, but that, in my opinion, it's a question of scale. I certainly don't want to create the impression that it's going to happen soon. One of our colleagues at UTS, Peter Rohde, has written a great book on the quantum internet, and he has great discussions in this book about the geopolitics of quantum computing in the future. And the nature of quantum computing is very, very different than classical computing. If I have two classical computers and I connect them together, I get double the power. If I have two quantum computers and I stick them together, the power goes up by the square. So it's multiplicative. It's not additive. So he has these great discussions in his book about the geostrategic implications of network computers and two countries that have subcritical quantum computing capacity, and then they connect them together and it becomes supercritical, and then it becomes vulnerable infrastructure. There's a computational incentive to cut off that communication stream. It's a great chapter if people take a look at it. But we're talking about a scale of these machines that personally I think I'd be lucky if I'm around to see. These machines have to be massive. And we're talking about, as I said, we're in the year 2023. We're probably not that far away from where digital computing was in 1923 in terms of the fundamental building blocks that are just getting started. So this is going to be a thing that plays out over the next 70 years, where we're really going to talk about the ethical considerations and the computational considerations as we move to the end of the century. So we've got a lot of filtering to do. We've got a lot of investigation to do about, as I said before, we're still searching for the killer applications for quantum computing that we want to do, not necessarily something that's going to be nefarious or something that would trigger ethical concerns. Not to say that we shouldn't start thinking about it, we should. But to a certain extent, let's not put the cart before the horse. The technology still has a long way to go, and we still need to figure these things out and filter these things out. Because otherwise, we're having these great in-depth discussions about the ethical considerations without a foundation of what the technology is actually going to look like.
Yeah, so I think just on that, it's very hard to say, what are the specific ethical considerations? But I think one thing that we can start to do is to think about what are the systems that we can set up in place so that as the ethical considerations emerge, we are able to rapidly then deal with them and address them. And I think that's where we totally don't have those systems in place at all. We don't have people who are trained to think about them. Everybody in quantum computing has an electrical engineering degree or a physics degree or a hardcore maths degree or something. We don't have the expertise to have those conversations at the moment. And I guess those frameworks are the things that we could start setting up. So, and that's where standardization can help. But we've got to make sure that we're setting up frameworks. We're not necessarily trying to find specific, example use cases.
Thank you, Nathan. I think that's a really interesting point to end our discussion on for today. In closing, on behalf of Standards Australia, I'd like to thank all our panellists for sharing their valuable insights into the world of quantum technology and the significance of standards in this revolutionary space. I'd also like to say thank you to our in-person audience and for those of you joining us online to celebrate the launch of our quantum technology white paper series. Following this session, copies of the report will be made available to you. And if you'd like further information or to be involved in our quantum technology work, you can reach out to us via our website. Or for those of you in the room, we'd love for you to join us for a morning tea after this session. On behalf of Standards Australia, thank you and have a fantastic morning.